Though the majority of Higurashi fans are intimately familiar with the main 8-chapter storyline spanning Onikakashi to Matsuri Bayashi, I can safely say without exaggeration that there is an abundance of thoroughly fascinating and rewarding content to be found by straying from the well-worn path and diving into the wealth of bonus material offered by the numerous adaptations and ports of the original sound novel. To wit, I found that my personal favorite story across all of Higurashi does in fact, to my amazement, reside external to all 8 main storyline chapters, instead originating from the franchise's manga adaptation, existing as a short and easily overlooked manga-exclusive 2-volume bonus scenario. And I'd like to spin this video unwrapping this story, the beautifully dark and somber epilogue that is Yoigoshi hen, and in doing so, hopefully shed some light on why this criminally underrated entry is absolutely worth your time. Yoigoshi hen, which translates to Beyond Midnight Chapter, was originally released in August of 2007 as a bonus side story to the second answer arc, Sumihoroboshi hen, following in the footsteps of 2006's manga-exclusive Onisarashi hen. It should be noted that, although there is some speculation on how much of a collaborative affair these entries were in practice, Ryakishi 7 is, in fact, officially credited as the author for both stories, thus making them technically canon entries in Higurashi's vast catalog of content. Yoigoshi fits somewhat clumsily into the overall Higurashi timeline as an epilogue to the bad end of Sumihoroboshi, set 23 years after the Great Hinamizawa disaster, in the world where Keiichi fails to stop Rena from blowing the entire school to pieces, taking Keiichi and the rest of the hostages along with her. For those familiar with the Dean adaptation, the Dean-exclusive premiere episode of Higurashi Kai, titled Reunion, can be thought of as a counterpart to Yoigoshi, as Reunion is set 20 years into the future of Sumihoroboshi's good end, where Keiichi successfully manages to convince Rena to stand down, only for the Great Hinamizawa disaster to occur anyway, and claim the lives of just about everyone in the village. Both stories involve a group of travelers who hold some connection to Hinamizawa's past, paying a visit to the long-abandoned ruins of the village and coming face to face with the sole survivor of the disaster. In Reunion, Rena Ryugu, and in Yoigoshi, a beautiful kimono-clad woman calling herself Mion Sonozaki. In 2010, with the release of the Higurashi Kizuna port for the Nintendo DS, Yoigoshi was adapted into a visual novel scenario as one of the game's bonus offerings. This adaptation of Yoigoshi, while broadly similar, contains some fairly radical disparities, courtesy of Kano Kichi, the scenario writer for much of Higurashi's console-exclusive content. It digs much deeper into several characters' backstories, loosely ties the chapter to the broader, overarching narrative that comprises the console-exclusive advanced story, and even sees the addition of an entirely new character, Miyuki. For this video, I'll be covering the DS port of Yoigoshi, as I personally believe it to be the more comprehensive and superior version, though the original manga offering is also superb in its own right, and more than worth a read, either on its own or alongside the visual novel version. Yoigoshi opens in 2006 with the story's protagonist, intrepid occult writer Ryunosuke Arakawa, and his companion, journalist and outdoor photographer Miyuki Sorimachi, traversing the winding, rain-slicked mountain roads leading to the ruins of Hinamizawa, which had previously been cordoned off from public access, the ban only having recently been lifted. Arakawa is on a mission to uncover and report the truth of the Great Hinamizawa disaster that claimed the lives of 2,000 inhabitants of the village 23 years ago, and has clung like a curse to those who were connected to the incident ever since. Miyuki seems to have her own ulterior reasons for accompanying him on this endeavor, something that Arakawa inadvertently discovers as he rifles through Miyuki's document case, where he finds only a regular camera and not a professional one that a photographer might use, alongside scores of reference material covering past incidents pertaining to the village. Combined with her uncanny ability to navigate the roads leading to Hinamizawa like the back of her hand, it quickly becomes clear to Arakawa that Miyuki's connection to the village runs much deeper than she is letting on. As the two begin to approach Hinamizawa, they come across a parked car, curiously nestled away on the outskirts of the village, and investigate, only to stumble upon a grisly scene, as the presence of a still burning charcoal grill and several unresponsive bodies inside suggests the worst case scenario, the aftermath of a group suicide pact. Arakawa shatters the window in an attempt to air out the vehicle, but finds that the grill has already done its work, and the two proceed to gingerly make their way on foot to Hinamizawa's nearby assembly hall to see if there is a phone they can use to notify the local authorities. Upon arriving, however, they discover, to their surprise, that they are not the only visitors to these abandoned ruins, as fate has brought them into contact with several other refugees seeking shelter for the night. Akira Otobe, Yae Towada, her boyfriend Takumi Kurosawa, who is fast asleep, and a woman acting as their unofficial host, the mysterious katana-wielding Mion Sonozaki. After a round of quick introductions, the group begins to put forth the reasons that brought them all to this ghost town, with Otobe recounting his story of being on a scenic sightseeing car trip with some friends. During a routine pit stop, Otobe had excused himself and left the group for a brief moment, soon returning to where their car had been parked, only to find that it had seemingly evaporated into thin air. Panic-stricken, he found himself racing down a nearby footpath where he encountered Mion, who guided him to the assembly hall. Mion jumps on this opportunity to introduce the group to the ancient legend of Oyashiro-sama, putting forth the theory that Otobe's friends may have been demoned away to satiate the spirits that dwell in these hallowed grounds, as the village is itself uniquely perched on the border between life and death. While the group struggles to digest this supernatural explanation, Mion announces her own reason for being here this evening, as she has personal matters to attend to in the Saiguden behind the Furude Shrine. Arakawa, Miyuki, and Otobe decide to accompany Mion, and Towada chooses to stay behind to watch after her boyfriend. However, after Mion finds what she is looking for, a shriek of terror from Towada prompts everyone to race back towards the assembly hall, where they find that Kurosawa has also gone missing, with Towada adamantly declaring that the same demons who had whisked away Otobe's group into oblivion have now made their way to the village proper and taken Kurosawa in the same manner, as well as the vehicle that he and Towada had arrived in. When Otobe reaches for his cell phone to call for help, he finds it has also gone missing, and though he eventually locates it after a frenzied search, it has somehow been smashed to pieces. Miyuki and Arakawa retrace their steps up and out of the village, only to find their own vehicle missing, and thus the group now finds themselves completely cut off from the outside world, at the mercy of some malevolent, unknown force, which seems to be intent on picking them off one by one. But most unnerving of all is Arakawa's discovery of a puzzling manuscript containing a list of names, specifically the casualties of the school explosion that rocked Hinamizawa 23 years ago, right before the disaster broke out. One of these names in particular is none other than the one given by the woman standing before them, Mion Sonozaki. I'll start by briefly touching upon the unique horror aspect of Yoigoshi, that is, how it is awash with the iconic, ominous, cryptic atmosphere that typifies Higurashi's brand of slow burn mystery. But at the same time, it allows for this eerie, atmospheric tension to thrive in a brand new environment, featuring a completely different set of social dynamics. The fear of the unknown, the inscrutable feeling that things are ever so slightly off, the skin-crawling paranoia, elements which harken back to the days of the early question arcs, all of them are still very much front and center, but are now expressed through the lens of a tightly focused character study in an enclosed setting, with the ultimate goal to uncover the real reason why fate conspired to bring them all here, to the claustrophobic confines of this dreary, desolate ghost town. Though punctuated with moments of levity, there is the sense that something sinister is afoot in the background, that each and every person gathered here tonight is unmistakably hiding something, and that the real fight is against the clock to determine if those secrets could spell certain doom for everyone involved. As Umineko is one of my favorite visual novels of all time, it should come as no surprise that Yoigoshi resonates with me particularly strongly, because it doles out tremendously effective tragic writing in spades, thematically not so different from the stories of the beleaguered Ushiromiya family on Rokkenjima Island. What really makes the tragic elements of Yoigoshi ring true, however, is how unsettlingly grounded and plausible they feel. A far cry from mawkish melodrama, the stories of our two wayward kindred spirits, Akira Otobe and Yae Towada, recount the honest and human battles that ordinary people face on a day-to-day basis. How one small misstep, a single decisive application of a misguided belief, can permanently upend the lives of those who are genuinely well-meaning at heart, seeking nothing more than a sense of purpose, doing their damnedest to carve out a fulfilling and meaningful existence in this unforgiving world. And because of this, it's difficult to not find yourself emotionally invested as their backstories unfold like a slow-motion car crash. Through Otobe's cautionary tale, we learn that his downfall was the result of his own insecurities and short-sightedness. His single-minded desire to live the life he believed he was destined for, in defiance of his parents' wishes and presumptions, led to him falling for the allure of modern society's myriad of vices and pressures. His way of coping with the subsequent crippling debt incurred by trying and failing to maintain the lavish, status symbol-laden lifestyle of a young and rich Tokyoite was to run, abandoning anyone and everyone who cared enough to reach out and check in on his well-being. Too ashamed to admit that in leaving his rural hometown behind for the big city, he had only managed to sink even lower than what he perceived to be the already rock-bottom expectations of his parents. Otobe continued to flee until he found himself railroaded onto a singular track, a one-way ticket to the mountains in a car with 3 others who had mutually concluded that the only release from their despair and misery was to put an end to things on their own terms. And even then, at his lowest point, he finds himself once again guided by his impulsivity and cowardice, eyeing the belongings of the freshly deceased, namely the pocketbook of Chiaki, as a get-out-of-jail-free card, yet another chance at a fresh start. In spite of barely slipping free from the jaws of death, nothing about his situation has changed. He's back to where he started, where he's been this entire time, on the run again, this time on a road straight to Hinamizawa. The only difference is the pilfered cash card he now holds, a symbol of what brought him down this path, a sin so deeply ingrained that even a near-death experience has proved incapable of extricating it. Towada's story, by comparison, is a frighteningly authentic and absolutely heart-rending story about how a romantic relationship, erected on a rocky foundation of fundamentally mismatched values and mired in miscommunication, had gradually faded into something toxic and polluted, as Towada's treachery is forcibly dragged out of her by Miyuki in a cold-blooded and chilling confession. What makes Towada's tale as unnerving as it is emotionally devastating is how easy it is to relate to the inescapable torment that could drive her to such a crossroads, to the point where she truly believed that this was, indeed, the only solution to end the cycle of mutual destruction plaguing her and her partner. Trapped between her genuine love for Kurosawa, her desire to retain total control over what she refused to acknowledge was but a mere illusion of a snugly compatible relationship, and her stifling resentment towards his refusal to put aside the pursuit of his own dreams, which were growing ever more futile day after day, for the more humble, peaceful family life that his partner desired, Towada takes it upon herself to shoulder the burdens of both parties, only to be rewarded with a torrent of physical abuse, which is all merely a projection of Kurosawa's own burgeoning guilt and self-loathing. When the strain of the situation becomes too much for Towada to bear, she decides to preserve the precious memories of their life together, of days long past, by taking her lover's life. But that's far from the end of the story, because Miyuki proceeds to skewer Towada with the truth that she had kept buried beneath her own self-pity, hidden so well that even she herself may have forgotten it. That, far from being merely the blameless victim, she too played a not insignificant role in architecting this precarious house of cards. Her inability to truly put her faith in Kurosawa in something so foundational as his original promise to put their mutual happiness above his own dreams resulted in her repeatedly throwing herself as a human barrier between him and the consequences of his poor decisions and life choices. A compassionate and selfless act on the surface, but in reality, nothing more than a crude instrument that Towada used for indulging her own personal fantasies, of keeping Kurosawa underfoot to painstakingly maintain the status quo, to fuel her saccharine delusion that the two were always meant to be in the hopes that things would eventually turn out alright in the end. Through the tragedy of these two pitiable souls, Yoigoshi conveys a simple, straightforward parable that pushes us to be cognizant of the fact that our own suffering is not unique, that it's the story of all of us, and that by not airing our hardships, our grief, honestly and candidly, we fail to form humanity's most effective and enduring lifeline, a thread that weaves a shared understanding between us which has the power to save us all. Had Otobe just owned up to his faults, his catastrophic mistakes, and sought reprieve from those who cared enough to offer a helping hand, he might have found that running from the consequences of his actions had also forced him off the most direct and efficient path towards recovery. Had the members of his suicide pact simply made their reservations known to each other, they would have collectively realized that the road trip they had embarked on had inadvertently reignited the will to live for something in all of them, even if that something were as mundane as the humble tranquility of a scenic, picturesque cruise through the mountains with a group of like-minded strangers. Had Towada just been honest with herself and with Kurosawa, even up until his final moments, she would have found ample capacity for mending and healing, as beneath Kurosawa's outbursts of violence and anger, beneath Towada's self-serving manipulation, there existed the still burning embers of a sincere love, made abundantly clear by Kurosawa's final decision, his cleansing act of repentance, to live up to his vow to Tawada, a vow that he sadly wasn't able to uphold, as time is, as always, the ultimate harbinger of calamity, wielding its scythe with Shakespearean flourish by granting Tawada this moment of earth-shattering realization and recognition. Her agnagnoresis, only after the damnable deed has already been carried out by her very hands. But like with any tragedy, things don't always necessarily end on a completely melancholic note, as, after an extended bout of long overdue introspection and catharsis, and primed by words of perseverance from Mion about what it truly means to live, both Otobe and Tawada decide to atone for their sins, returning to the lives that they thought they had discarded in coming to Hinamizawa, leaving this purgatory with a renewed determination to stop dithering and to walk the long road of hardship that they themselves had paved, to face those consequences head-on, with the intention to someday, somewhere far down the line, finally move past them. The central narrative conflict of Yoigoshi concerns Mion returning to her long-abandoned hometown in search of a sacred Sonozaki family heirloom. This heirloom will install her as the official head of the household, thus placing her directly in the crosshairs of several other high-ranking members of the organization, who would love nothing more than for her to meet her untimely demise, opening the door for them to seize the heirloom and the power it carries for themselves. The climax of Yoigoshi is a showdown between Mion and the man who orchestrated the assassination of her mother, Akane. Mion is fatally wounded in the ensuing struggle and seems to succumb to her injuries, only for the truth to come to light, that Mion was not but a lingering spirit temporarily inhabiting the body belonging to her sister, Shion Sonozaki, refusing to vacate this mortal coil until she had successfully guided her sister to the location of the heirloom. But with Shion's life now in imminent danger, she deliberately outstays her visit and leverages her incorporeality to shoulder the injury, allowing Shion to survive, to put it into the Splinter faction and claim her rightful title as the head of the Sonozaki house. In a way that is undeniably true to the essence of her character, Mion's final act was to unify the Sonozaki family by sacrificing herself one more time to protect the ones closest to her, bringing her long journey to a close and leaving her legacy in the hands of the once incorrigible family pariah, Shion, who has, herself, demonstrably grown by leaps and bounds over the past 2 decades. Not only had Shion managed to overcome the sobering, devastating loss of all of her friends, she's conjured the resolve to move past her animosity and contempt for the household that once ostracized her, to take up the mantle and the blade in the name of her late sister, both literally and figuratively. The final terse words exchanged between the siblings, Mion's characteristically optimistic wish to be reunited in another world, and Shion's equally characteristically vulnerable plea for her sister to remain by her side, are equal parts somber and heartwarming, and speak volumes of their inseparable bond, which has continued to endure, never once faltering, in the 23 years since they were last together. It all makes for a comparatively short-lived and subdued, but still thoroughly poignant and fulfilling end to both their character arcs. As someone who had neglected Higurashi's bonus content for years, believing it to be little more than a collection of curios, mildly interesting but largely forgettable excursions, the last thing I expected was to find Higurashi's most emotionally stirring and inspiring gem among them. Over the course of Yoigoshi's short sojourn, we find ourselves reacquainted with Higurashi's masterfully nuanced atmospheric horror. We see the Sonozaki sisters off with a well-deserved swan song, and, most importantly, we learn the final fate of Hinamizawa, what its place in the world is post the Great Disaster, which is that of a sanctuary, a refuge for those who feel similarly forsaken by the world. But just as Hinamizawa is lost to time, those seeking solace within its derelict and decaying walls inevitably bring themselves face to face with the specter of the past, forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that this is the demon that they must overcome if they truly wish to find a way out of the darkness and on the road to recovery. Breaking free is never easy. It requires unwavering and indomitable resolve, and the acceptance that the world you step back into will be none the more cheerier or less harsh and unfeeling than when you left it. But as Arakawa expresses in his closing monologue, finding the strength to face and leave behind our past, our own personal Hinamizawa, is the only way we truly move forward.